All right. What's up, everyone? Hello, Amy. Welcome. So glad to have you here.
Wonderful to be
Um,
here, Adam.
yes. And we're also here with April Jones, who goes by AJ, and Alana Pura, who are both behind the scenes making this happen.
Thank you both.
And welcome to everyone who is joining us here. So if you don't mind, just to type in the chat the city that folks are calling in from, and we could just see where people are joining us. And we're going to dive into this conversation around a healing approach towards leadership development. So, Amy, it's been so amazing for me to watch the rise and the development of Mobius over the years. Um, I have so many people in my network who are part of Mobius and who are have been part of this journey that you have been curating and creating. And I know that also we share this deep love and friendship for my mentor, Charlie Murphy, who passed in 2016, who is so dear to my heart. And I've just been really inspired by your approach to leadership development and the way that you talk about facilitation. So, yes.
Thank you so much, Adam. Whenever we talk, I feel Charlie's spirit here with us, which is utterly precious. He's one of the dear brothers of my life, and I miss him all the time. So it's very sweet, and I'm delighted to be here with you and your community. It's very important work you're doing.
Mhm. I call in Charlie's spirit every single time before I step into the room to facilitate,
Oh,
including just now in the bathroom. I'm in a hotel room in Boston, and I called in Charlie before stepping onto this call with you. So
that's love.
um, we have Scott joining us from Cleveland, Lindsay from Austin, Todd, what's going on from Arbor, Michigan, Carol in Chicago, Texas, Istanbul, New Mexico, Sweden, Canada, London, Santa Cruz, Ottawa, Canada. Welcome, everyone. So, Amy, maybe just to start, would you just give a quick intro of yourself and a little introduction to the work of Mobius Executive Leadership? Just
Sure, I'd be
an
delighted to do.
appetizer. Mm-hmm.
So, Mobius is a transformational leadership firm that I founded with my sister, Erica Ariel Fox, 19 years ago. So, we're about to head into our 20th anniversary year, which feels hard to fathom and glorious to behold. And we live at sort of the nexus of best practice and next practice. So, on one side, we're drawing on the lineage of thinking about organizational learning and adaptive leadership and adult development and innovation that's growing out of the canon over the last 30 years of scholarship at Harvard University. And on the other hand, like you, we're renegades and introducing into the world of leadership development, the expressive arts, the devotional arts, the intimate arts of attuned relationship, and a deep healing impulse that really pushes the work, I think, to meet leaders in a profound way, to cultivate the kinds of maturity and spiritual depth that are needed to lead in this particular moment of time. So, uh,
Mm,
about me personally, I started my career at the Cathedral Church of St. John the Divine in 1989 till 98, and I had a glorious 10 years working under Carl Sagan and then Senator Gore and Paul Gorman to jumpstart a religious response to the environmental crisis. It's where I know Charlie from. And I had an amazing apprenticeship with them to really learn how you think about using liturgy and ritual and consciousness development to change society around issues that really matter. And then I became trained in working with trauma, both family and collective and ancestral trauma. And I bring that sort of psychological lens to the world of executive development.
yeah. I love that you have that tie-in with Charlie. It's so amazing. And I know that you're in a hotel room right now in Lisbon, and that
Yes.
last week you were in Cape Cod at the Next Practice Institute, which is a week-long learning conference for Mobius practitioners around the world to come together. So I'm sure there's a lot that you could share about what you're coming from, but maybe you could just give us a little bit, one like moment or a learning experience that you have coming out of this last week, because I know it was so potent.
Mm, thank you for that question. Yeah, so when we started Mobius, we realized that perhaps as much as it was a professional services firm, it was also a movement to try to really create a global community of practice of facilitators, coaches, therapists, and artists who wanted to contribute to a better world. And so every year we gather for a week in person, and then we live stream all of the keynote presentations so that we can have a much larger ripple effect in the world. And it's a beautiful event in part, Adam, because it's not just Mobius practitioners. It's 200 practitioners from all of our theoretically competitive organizations. And it's been so touching to me that since we started the event 7 years ago, tons of different organizations have used it as a way to refine their and gather and inspire their facilitators. And it's a very important conviction of mine that it's a moment in time that is has such potential for restoration and such threat of real darkness that I think we can no longer think inside the traditional boundaries of organizational life. And those of us who want to help should be generously helping everybody to get better at what their craft is. So it's a wonderful event. It's, there's a lot of joy. There's a lot of deep learning. There's both sort of seminal thinkers presenting their life's work and emerging voices sharing the fresh wind of our field. We have concurrent learning tracks that spend 5 days studying one particular tributary of this work. As you know, I think of transformational facilitation as a quite interdisciplinary art and something that takes a lifetime to get good at. So the annual gathering is intended to be something you come back to over and over and over as if it was a 40-year graduate program in the art of facilitation and coaching.
Yeah, and I know that one of our facilitators, Elizabeth Solomon, who also works with Mobius, was there last week, as well as a dear friend, and also somewhat of a business mentor to me, Michael Drouard, who and his partner Marielle were both there from Brussels, from Belgium. And so I've been getting reports back.
Oh, that's so lovely. Yeah. And I've just finished teaching a year-long training for facilitators and coaches with my teacher, Thomas Hubel, in trauma-informed approaches to development work. And Michael was in that program, and a super glistening human, as you know. And that program also really was so inspiring. It was 200 practitioners taking a year to really educate themselves and understand the multiple dimensions of trauma impact as it shows up in executive behavior and team dynamics, in organizational stuckness. And I hope that will be a sort of new threshold of competency that enters our field as a kind of requirement of all of us to get more trauma sensitive. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, I feel like I'm looking for me, especially like male mentors in leadership who are representing and modeling a certain way of being in the world and in business that inspires me and kind of pushes me forward. And actually, Michael is one of those people that I look up to in that way. So back in last year, I think in May or so, I remember listening to an interview that you did on the Coaches Rising podcast, and I was taking like furious notes as you were talking about the art of evolutionary facilitation. And I consider myself somewhat of a facilitation nerd. It's something that I love to like a piece apart and talk about what's happening behind the scenes. And so I created this drawing that represented a lot of the learnings that I learned from you in this talk. And one of the things that I remember like really there was a through line between Late Nite Art and Mobius was this emphasis around music and the arts as a sort of special doorway into facilitation and leadership practices. And which I love this quote of like, music is another gateway to become more expanded. I love that you said that. But one thing that also really stood out to me that I realized I keep talking about, and I think I bring it up all the time, is the importance of developing a community of practice and creating a group of practitioners that's doing deeper inner work together. And I love that this idea that you shared around when we have a deep community of practice and we're doing this inner work, and then one of us goes off into a room to facilitate with a group, that we're bringing the wisdom and the sort of transmission of energy and experience from all of that group of practitioners with us, so that we're never alone. And I feel like I've really been trying to cultivate that within my team and Late Nite Art. And I'm just curious to hear you talk about NPI. Seems like a beautiful way to instill that each year, but I'm curious other ways that you do that with the Mobius practitioners to create that sort of energy field as a group.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, let me just say it is actually creating an energy field. That's very much the intention. And it's both a relational field, it's an energetic field, and it's a mystical field. All of those dimensions. It has a numinous quality to it because it's built in devotion. And there's lots of ways you weave it together. I mean, absolutely, the annual gathering is one. We also do very small supervision circles for our practitioners where people do their own healing work with Thomas in groups of, say, 10 or 15 Mobius practitioners. So we are sort of witnessing and supporting one another's deepest inner repair. And that creates a kind of rawness and truth telling and de-shaming process in a way, because when people are willing to accompany you to your own most fragile and fragmented places, you really trust that they're walking with you, and you know that they're walking with you. And that harbor that we have for one another then becomes the sort of cradle that we offer out to the participants that are coming into programs. And it walks in the fabric of real friendships between us. And I think it walks in the space between the words that we speak. There's a message of the trustworthiness of love and the unconditional nature of love. And in my experience, that's a melting force, that when you put participants into that kind of a crucible that's formed by the alchemy of co-healing, their healing process gets kind of triggered immediately. It's a sort of initiatory field in a sense. We also do mystical study groups. We have a 10-day energy class where people learn to read subtle realms and to manage their own energy defense patterns, sort of the Reichian habits that we all have when we get triggered and reactive. So one of the things we start to have within the Mobius community is a fluency with one another's fear responses, so that it becomes easy for us to kind of nudge each other and say, you might want to, go take a break now. Or let me take that one.
Yeah.
Or that particular participant looks like you're going to struggle with them. Why don't I take that one? And it's kind of sweet shorthand of making sure that the container stays sacrosanct and that we're not imposing ourselves where, for a moment, we're not a skillful pair of hands.
Yeah. I love people who are the edge walkers, who are bringing different fields together. And I really appreciate this about Mobius and about you, of bringing so many different unlikely modalities into the realm of leadership development and executive development, because, and people think of this with me too, with like when they think of executive leadership development, they think of, kind of crisp lines, like ballroom in a hotel. Like there's like a certain image that people might have around what that looks like. And
I'm really so grateful, Adam, that both of us are hacking that, because I think that's deadening, actually, that kind of learning. We are not doing business school PowerPoint. And so you asked about the introduction of the arts. In our work, I always teach with a cellist. I have several Grammy Award-winning cellists that I have the privilege to travel with. We increasingly bring a theater actress with us, Anne Gottlieb, who leads people in experiential work with text, with scripture, with poetry. I have a wonderful painter named Lewis Parsons who does his soulscaping work and has people paint their soul in the programs. We, of course, have meditation practices, contemplative practices. We often have somebody trained by Richard Strozzi Heckler in somatic leadership, leading martial arts practice every day. We always do the programs in a beautiful setting with nature as a resource for soul retrieval. When you're asking people to do dark work or to excavate the rooms of the house where they normally don't look, I think that having beauty and inspiration and self-expression is an urgently needed fuel for the journey into the dark rooms. So I don't think of it as sort of an elective that's sort of a nice thing off to the side. I think it's an essential part of the intervention. And also, people are so exhausted. I mean, I'm sure you see this in your programs. People walk in a state of such depletion, and it's physical, but it's also emotional, and it's also spiritual. And so the expressive arts are like bringing, manna to the desert in a sense. Like they just wake people up, literally wake them up and revitalize them. And it's incredibly sweet. On the last day, often people will say, like, I wrote a poem this week for the first time in, years. Or I had one beautiful guy say, I sang devotional bhajans for the first time in 20 years in my room this morning. And I could have cried. I was like, yes.
Oh, I deeply believe in everything that you just said, and have seen it in practice over the last 13 years as I've been bringing the arts into these business environments. And especially, I just did our second round of our Late Nite Art Train the Trainer program 2 or 3 weeks ago. And since then, there's been a very active What's Up thread where people are sharing their artwork, they're sharing their like dance and their drawings and their songs. And it's like such a beautiful expression because these are business leaders who are so almost like giddy in their like creative expression now, and like the activation of that side of them that's been dormant. And so it's been really beautiful to watch that. So I wonder if I want to go, but like zoom out a little bit more, and if you could just share a little bit more of your why around why you do this work personally. Like, what is it? Like, if anything that you'd like to share about that, around that kind of personal like pull.
Well, in a sense, I mean, I could say that it starts when I started trying to do environmental consciousness raising in the late 80s. And it was very clear, Adam, that the science was already well in hand. I had the privilege and horror of listening to briefing on briefing by the man who discovered the hole in the ozone layer and the world's leading expert on deforestation and species depletion and global warming. And even in the late 80s, there was nowhere to hide in terms of the damage we were doing to the biosphere. And the science alone was insufficient in our experience to prompt the moral, ethical, and relational response that was necessary to actually start to safeguard ecology. And so I'm very interested in consciousness raising. What's the process of helping somebody to drop out of their numbness so that they can respond, or as Thomas might say, be response able. And I became more and more aware, both in my own healing journey personally and in my family history, but also in my work as a social activist and a social entrepreneur, that the salt in the wheel of progress was trauma. And that there was no way to go about cultural architectural change or be a cultural creative without being a skilled healer of trauma. And at least for me, it just became obvious. And so I spent a bunch of years really trying to refine myself as a practitioner of the art of the helping somebody have a truly safe and sacred space to metabolize the life that they've lived and the events that they've lived through. And what I see from doing this with thousands of people now in the context of executive development is three things. People are yearning for and waiting for that safe space. I often share this story that happened about a month ago where a man came to me at the end of the program and he said, "I want to thank you, Amy." And I said, "You're welcome." And he said, "I want to tell you why I'm thanking you." And I said, "Of course." And he said, "You helped me to cry the tears I've walked with for 63 years. And I thought, that's the nature of society. We're walking with unshed tears. And those tears are the waterfall of the future. We won't stop repeating the history of the violence and genocide and colonialism and everything we're now living in the aftermath of until we lay to rest the screams of our ancestors and the tears that we harbor. So that is the work of our time, that you can't talk about leadership development without talking about the leader as a healer. You can't talk about organizational thriving without talking about the company and the NGOs and nonprofits becoming sanctuaries of that healing. So I feel very urgent about it, and maybe that's my why. Maybe that's at least a headline of my why.
Yeah. And I remember I read something that you wrote on LinkedIn a few months ago that also really moved me. That was a very strong call to action for leaders not to suffer in silence and to isolate themselves, and recognizing that leaders don't have that many places to go to share the kind of bottom 5%, and just you mentioned just the trickle down effect of what happens when leaders don't actually do that work, and how it affects all of us. And so
that's right. There was an article that I saw that prompted that LinkedIn response, in which a very powerful, seemingly successful and presumably happy senior executive, a CEO, had committed suicide. And I was really touched by it, as I am by any suicide, of course. But what really struck me is that we assume that because people have accomplished a certain amount of worldly success or seemingly risen to the top of their field, that they've done their inner work and that they're wholesome and whole and safe. And that's not my experience. experience is that most of them are in a pandemic of loneliness, have very little emotional vocabulary and emotional self-contact. And as you said, Adam, even less a web of relational intimacy around them. So I do a module in my programs where I ask people, how would
No.
they could get hugged or someone could listen to them? And I say, I'm sorry, something.
We lost you for a second, Amy. Oh no. Looks like the connection is not great for some reason in this moment. We just lost you for a couple seconds, Amy. Can you hear us? Can you hear us? Oh, you're back. We just lost you for a couple seconds. But
so sorry. As you said, I'm in a hotel in Lisbon, so I apologize, everyone.
Totally. No problem.
I'll just refresh my point. I hope it's not redundant to what you guys heard. I was saying that I do an exercise in my programs where I ask executives, what could people do to support you, not as a problem solving or collaborating, but emotionally support you? And they mostly can come up with two things. Somebody could listen to them or somebody could hug them. They don't have a language. They don't have a language for the art of mutuality, of generosity, of interdependence, really. And so we go through a process of naming about 100 things. And then I ask them to spend time thinking about which of these needs are well wired in their life and which could they add to their repertoire so that they walk less alone. And there's this poignant moment always in every group where somebody finally has the courage to raise their hand and say, Amy, I have no idea outside this room where I would ask for that.
Mm. Yeah, I'm so glad that you're providing that space. Yeah,
I'm providing the space, but I really mean to be providing a hint of what now needs to go happen and get, restored in life. Exactly.
Everywhere. Yeah. We don't want it to only happen in this room. Yeah, I mean, and that's how I feel too. Oh no, you're frozen again. But that's how I feel about Late Nite Art too. It's a 90-minute or 2-hour experience that we're providing, but we're hoping that it models something that can become a microcosm that could then get repeated and people just feel more comfortable. It's like a path that they've walked once that now is trodden. They can go back again and again.
Exactly. That's gorgeously said. And then it becomes a practice. Yeah, that's beautiful.
Yes. And they know that it's possible because a lot of people don't think it's possible until they've experienced it.
And there's something else in this notion of a microcosm, which is I think we could waste our energy trying to make minor improvements at the margins of the way organizational life functions. But I actually think it's much more potent to create something that's a microcosm of a complete alternative set of agreements. Yes. And then the other thing becomes obsolete because this has such a magnetic attraction of life force.
Exactly.
So I love and admire what you're doing for that same reason.
And I really resonated when you said this previously on the Coaches Rising podcast, that when we show people a different way of doing business and being in relationship with one another that is more from the heart, they will choose that every single time. The kind of status quo transactional business relationships are, normal, but once they see the other way, it's hard to go back in some way, or so we hope. Yeah.
And I've had the privilege of doing this for a long time, and when I started doing it in middle management, people would say, well, this is great for us, Amy, but we the top leaders would never do it. Then I started doing it with senior leaders, and they would say, this is great, but our C-suite would never do it. Now I do programs for CEOs, and then just this last year I started doing them for board chairs. So there's nowhere that isn't hungry for this. I feel very confident that this is a universal yearning and a universal urgency. Yeah,
absolutely. So I'm going to ask, just what do you feel like people get wrong? I mean, I feel like we've been talking about this the whole time in some ways, like what people get wrong when it comes to leadership development. Obviously, like creating a space that feels like dead, doing it like the lack of the arts and creativity and trying to be professional and how that actually can kind of kill the spirit. Yeah. But what else would you say people are getting wrong about leadership development?
I think 3 things. One, you said, which is this bifurcation of personal and professional, so that development becomes an anti-intimate art, which is, to me, just impossible. Like you can't learn without whole body learning, whole person learning, whole heart learning. So that's one. The second, which is just, I think, diabolical, is the request that you do profound transformative work in a footprint of an hour or 2 hours. Now, I believe what you can do in 2 hours is exactly what you're doing masterfully, which is elevate people's imagination and activate a field that they can then integrate back in work. But where they're asking me to do real character development and mature somebody's ability to create psychological safety, to innovate and collaborate, to ensure collective intelligence, to help an organization cultivate change agility. These are deep transformational capacities that cannot be done in a day. And so the commoditization of learning versus actual development. I said in my keynote last week, I think we should even let go of the word development and start talking about soul refinement. Because really that's what's needed, is leaders who can host the chaos of what's coming and stand for justice and stand for love and stand for kindness and peace and name when things are out of alignment. And that requires a bigger vessel than people have. And that expansion process takes time.
Yeah. Amy, can you do that in 20? Yeah. Can you do your
Exactly.
5-day program in 30 minutes or in 1 hour? I hear that a lot.
And you really can't. And the third is, the level of trauma that people are walking with. That's the third thing we get wrong. We try to create interventions that bypass what is the central operating system that drives their behaviors most of the time. And the minute you see that and you start to really hear people's stories, they entrust them to you. It becomes obvious how pervasive and multi-generational and impactful trauma is for almost every executive. When you think about it, who's going to work that hard? People that work that hard often had to be the hero child in their family, playing a parental role too early, and they've been running ever since. So you can keep them running, but then you're going to start to see health costs and spiritual loss and family decay. So we also can stop them running and give them a significant pause. And in that pause, their whole life can get rewritten and the book of life can restore itself. It's profound, but it takes time, and you have to know where to put the acupuncture needle.
Yeah, absolutely. And it seems more important now than ever, especially for people that have an impact on tens of thousands of people, like based on their behavior and how they actually act. I know
that's right. I just want to make sure that we're adding that on. That's very important. We said it's not just good for them; it's critical for everybody that works under them and every life that they touch and influence. That's right.
Yeah, and private businesses are more important than ever. Like, they have more influence than ever before, I think, in terms of how many people are impacted and the level of influence that they have in society.
Yes, and as governments have more and more regressive leadership, the maturity is going to have to come from elsewhere.
That's right. So I know we're coming shortly to a close. I want to give a chance for people to ask some questions or last comments in the chat. So you could just go ahead and type those in. And before we jump into that, I just want to share. So tomorrow, I'm in Boston right now. Tomorrow, my co-facilitator, Elizabeth Solomon, and I, she works also with you in Mobius Executive Leadership. We're going to be working with 125 HR leaders with the Human Resources Leadership Forum. And really, it's around processing the collective fatigue and challenges that people are facing post-election. And one of the things that we're going to be leading them through is having them visualize their inner critic and their inner coach and the things that they have running in their mind that they don't share generally, and be able to let that loose with the hopes that it creates some camaraderie and connection and a sense of not being alone in what people are processing right now. So it's just fun to share like a direct example of like how I'm thinking about this as I work with leaders, and getting them to take the internal and externalize it through the arts, basically.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And it also makes it so much more universal. When you're just criticizing yourself in your head, you could think it's just an isolated incident, but actually we're all doing that. So that's beautiful.
Exactly. Okay, let's see. Let's get one of the questions. Maybe we can share it out loud. All right, from Shara. I'm curious about how receptive leaders have been to addressing ancestral trauma in their organizations, and how you're addressing ROI into those conversations.
Thank you for your question, Tira. I have a good answer to the first one and not as satisfying an answer to the second one. How receptive are leaders to addressing ancestral trauma? Very receptive is the answer, but you have to create a context in which that becomes a safe thing to open up. So as Adam mentioned, when I'm going to do trauma work as part of an executive program, which is not everything Mobius does, but it is uniquely, a few of us do it deeply. I take them away. I take them offline for 5.5 days. Before they come, they get a systematic trauma screening. So they have a chance to already start to think about their lineage, their family history, their experience in their early childhood and precious developmental periods, and sort of any crucible moments in their lifetime ahead of coming. And then the program itself is conducted by me and another plenary facilitator and 5 expert trauma therapists. So I'm introducing some of these concepts at a pretty high level in the plenary session. And then each person steps out during the week for a 3 or 4 hour private examination of their own adverse experiences and how those show up in their leadership. And then the intimacy of those private sessions trickles back into the plenary, of course, to keep deepening and dropping the conversation that they're having in small groups and with each other on walks and in their journals. And then we culminate all of that on the final evening where they do a restoration ritual for themselves about whatever opened up for them, whatever they want to let go of, whatever insight they had, whatever was unfinished business with somebody in their lives. And they participate in one another's rituals. So it's very profound and very beautiful. But I language all of that in terms of how I make the invitation to a corporate client as doing the kind of work that will unlock transformational capabilities, not with trauma as the forefront of the sort of value proposition, let's say, to use business language, but as the background of what it takes to do the work and get that unlock. In terms of ROI, I often wish that I could take a picture of the person when they walk in Sunday night and a picture of the person when they walk in Friday, because the conversation about ROI would be over. I mean, they're just literally look like a different person. They've dropped weight of their, of lifetimes of pain and sadness and grief and fear and anger, and they're just free. They're just a quality of aliveness and openness and joyfulness and availability. It's like they drop a shield and start meeting heart to heart. But I don't really know is the honest answer. And I'd be really interested here if you have some thoughts, how to capture what the impact of that is. I just know because I hear from people a decade later that week was a turning point in their lives. I've just come to really trust that if you make an offer that's this profound, its ripple effects are vast. And I sort of know that in my heart. And I've been grateful to have clients that could hear the music that I'm singing well enough to invite me to do this with them.
Beautiful. Yes. Thank you so much, Amy. I know we're just at time. So I know that we're going to post in the chat a few things. One is a resource that is a sort of many of the articles that you've written, Amy, on LinkedIn, that's kind of all together into this beautiful PDF document that's going to be sent out. And we're also going to share a link that is a resource that my team is creating called Humanizing the Workplace, a practical playbook for people leaders to leverage the 5 elements of the Late Nite Art method. So those are 2 things that we're going to just send you off with. But in the last 30 seconds, would you just share maybe one takeaway that you would like to leave people with today as we're closing this out?
Yeah, well, I want to just thank you again, Adam, not just for today, but for the visionary work you're doing in the world. It's very inspiring and very comforting to me to know that we're both out there in this way. And if I would leave people with anything, I would say all the work you do on your own healing and all the work you do on your own self-expression and joy and filling your cup is the most important thing to do if you want to get better at this work. Going inside and becoming a different transmission of presence, of possibility, and of hope. That's really a precious gift to give yourself, that you also give all of us as we try to be healers out in the world. It's really, there isn't a better starting place than starting with yourself.
Beautifully said. I know that is the reality of so many of the leaders that love to support others, but really when it comes back to doing the work and looking inside at the things that we don't want to see, that's where it starts to get really to the next level. So thank you for inspiring me to do that for myself. Thank you, Amy, so much for creating like a refreshing oasis in this world of leadership development and incorporating like the healing work that is going to help us move forward. So yeah, some of the comments in the chat, people are saying, this is the best conversation I've ever heard about leadership and leadership evolution. Yeah, it's good to see you, Amy. So I know that you were taking a break from your own program in Lisbon, and now you're going right back into the fold here.
Thank you, everybody, for taking time to be with us. What a joy. Take care, everyone.
Absolutely. Okay, talk to you soon. Bye, Amy.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.